Hey folks, today we are going to learn about the Angular template context mental model. And alternative title for this talk is actually the most important thing you need to understand about the Angular, which maybe sounds a bit too strong, but you will see later during the talk why this makes perfect sense. But first, let me introduce myself. So thanks, Adi, for like a very warm welcome. My name is Tomas Trajan. I am a Google developer expert for Angular and web technologies. I'm working as a consultant / contractor for Angular, doing workshops, blogging about it, speaking at the conferences, all things Angular. So yeah, international conference speaker, at least before COVID. Hopefully this can restart now, and doing workshops with focus on Angular, RxJS, and GRX, and hopefully in the future also NX monorepos. Many of you might know me from my blogging at tomastrajan.medium.com. Many articles, almost 4 million views. People seem to enjoy the content. And if you are by any chance writing on the Medium by yourself, you might be interested in the Medium Enhanced Stats Chrome extension, which gives you this nice little total overview, also created by me. Besides that, we have this new blog, which was teased by the Adi at angularexperts.io/blog, together with Kevin Kreutzer, another fellow GDE, where we are going to push new Angular and related content. So do not hesitate, visit it, subscribe, so you get notified whenever the new free blog post was released. Besides that, I have been active in open source for quite some long time. One of the most popular projects is Angular NGRX Material Starter, which is now a little bit dated, but still contains a lot of cool examples how to implement stuff like theming, how to use material components, how to manage your state with NGRX, and all this kind of cool stuff. So you can definitely have a look and learn something from that. And besides that, if you are using Angular together with like web components or other Angular elements, you might be interested in Angular extensions elements, which is a library which allows you to lazy load Angular elements and other web components in your Angular applications. It's like more than 31,000 downloads per month, so feel free to check that out too. But now it's time to hop into the topic. So as you are probably aware, there are these new exciting times for Angular because with the last couple of releases, namely Angular 14 and Angular 15, there have been quite some big changes. So first of all, the Vue engine was removed, and now we are in the pure Ivy world, which means that the Angular is now only shipping with the Ivy rendering engine, and the Vue engine was removed, right? So it's Ivy only. And this is now unlocking a development of a lot of new features. So maybe you heard about stuff like strictly typed reactive forms, or like directive host directive composition and stuff like that. So this kind of pure Ivy world allows us to experience new big steps in the Angular framework evolution. And one of the biggest initiatives in that new direction is to make the NG modules optional and introduce a new way of doing things, which is called Angular standalone components, or for shortening, we'll call it like SACS, which is like kind of funny shortening or abbreviation, right? Like maybe you are also aware of the scam pattern in Angular, which we'll also discuss then later. So this is another one called like SACS. So, and because of introducing of this new approach of doing things with the optional NG modules and the standalone components, there have been worries that like, is Angular going to break again? Why are we introducing another way to doing the same? Like, what's going to happen? Because people, of course, remember like what happened in the past with like AngularJS and Angular. But the good thing is that this will not be the case at all, and we are going to learn today why. So what about the NG modules, right? So we could write our Angular applications very successfully of any kind of scale, like enterprise scale or like smaller, more focused things. They serve us very well. They support all the use cases. So why are we making them optional, right? So the NG modules, Angular still will support the NG modules. They are not going away anytime soon. And NG modules and standalone components can mix and match with ease. So that means if we have an application which is already using NG modules and we want to start using standalone components next to it, is not a problem. We can start writing some new components using this approach and mix and match, right? So both NG modules and SACS share the common underlying reality, right? If we can use them together, it means that they must have something in common so that they can interoperate with ease. And this is this common underlying reality. And this is something which we are going to explore in this talk. So this is going to be quite a journey, so please strap in and let's get to it. So first stop on our journey is to have a closer look on the Angular templates. So what are they? Like in Angular, when we want to render some stuff on the screen, we basically have to write some template, and it's a way to have a declarative UI. So we have to decide what should be displayed. So for example, we display like a heading or something like that with the HTML, or what should change when the data changes. And for that, we have a binding, right? So in the Angular, when we want to print some string, we can use the double curly braces where we can basically do a string interpolation to print some string. And this is going to be updated whenever the value of that property changes, right? And then we can also handle user interaction where we can bind to the native and custom Angular events using the round bracket syntax, right? So this is very familiar to anyone who already used Angular to implement some component. So this is also much better than what we have been doing long time in the past, where we had to do something like this, where we were basically doing like the imperative template updates, where we're taking like a reference to some HTML element in our template, and then we would reassign it with some other HTML, which was very error prone and always done in a different way. So that's like one of the biggest benefits of Angular and other front-end frameworks, which allow us to write declarative UIs. So one thing about the Angular is that Angular components can use all the standard HTML elements in their template out of the box. So what does that mean? As here in this example, if we want to use something like a heading, paragraph, button, we can just use them and it will just work. Those are the native HTML elements, standard HTML element, and it's going to just work. But what about if we have something more complicated like this? So in this template, here we see we are using some kind of strange HTML tags which are not native to the browser, like material card header, material icon, right? So what are those? Those are additional Angular components, especially those are coming from a very popular Angular material, or currently called Angular components library, which is basically a set of high quality components maintained by the Angular team, which makes implementation of your application even faster because you don't have to write common stuff like cards and other widgets like input types and date pickers and stuff like that, right? Or icons. So this is a example of a more realistic Angular template where we are displaying some information about the user, and we can then maybe edit it or remove it. Now, what is going on here? So yeah, we have these other Angular components like material card or material icon. More so, we have also some Angular directives like ngIf or mat button. I think ngIf is not here, but here we can see on the button, there is this mat button, which basically changes the look and behavior of the native HTML button, and that's Angular directive. And then we have also Angular pipes, especially here it's a little bit cutted because it doesn't fit, is the date pipe, which will format the date value stored in that property to be nice and human readable. So to recapitulate, we have three different things. We have the Angular components, Angular directives, and Angular pipes. And if we had a template like this without any previous setup and try to compile this application, we would get error which would look something like this. So basically, would complain that the user item component tries to use element which is not known, like a material card, and that we should make sure that the material card, if it's an Angular component, should be part of this module, which is the key part of that error statement, which gives us a hint how to solve it. So this is very important. Let's keep that in mind. Now, of course, if we use the standalone components instead of ng modules, we would get exactly the same error, which is slightly adjusted message where we would discover that material card component, if it's an Angular component, should be included into the components imports, right? So, and this gives us like this first hint about this underlying reality and what the template context is going to be. And it is also very important to realize that we would get exactly the same errors if we for the directives and pipes, right? So whenever we try to use something in the template, we would get this kind of error if we didn't prepare a proper setup before using those. So using other Angular components, pipes, and directives doesn't work without setup. This brings us to the concept of the Angular declarables. So Angular components, directives, and pipes have many things in common. They are used in the templates of each other, and they need setup to work. Without the setup, we are going to get an error. And with ng modules, they need to be declared in the declarations array of exactly one module, belong to one module. They can only ever belong to one module. And with the standalone components, they have to be declared as a standalone true. And this is why we are going to call those three, the components, directives, and pipes, declarables. So this is like a first definition, which we are then going to use throughout the presentation. So in Angular, everything which has something to do with the template, components, directives, and pipes can be called declarable or declarables. Now, with all this in place, we can start talking about this Angular template context mental model. So first stop, what is a mental model? Well, mental model is basically a model of how something works in a real world. That could be like a real stuff, like if we see a door and the door has a door handle, we know if we push the door handle, the door will probably open. But then this can get even more complicated, maybe because there is a door with the door handle, but there is also a key. And then our mental model can be extended in such a way that if there is a key, the door might be locked or unlocked before it can be opened or not opened, right? So, and something like this also works like in the programming, right? So we have basically all of us have and use many mental models, and we are using them all the time. So a very cool example from the programming world or software engineering world can be something like a variable. So with the variable, we know it's a kind of like a, let's say like a box where we can store some kind of value, and this value might or might not change based on the type of variable. So it's already getting like more complex. And then that variable can be probably accessed from some other parts of program, like to reference it, to read that value, right? So everybody who is doing software engineering has a mental model of a variable. Then another example of like building on top of that original mental model would be something like an array, which probably we need to understand what the variable is before we can understand what is an array. And then we would understand that array is basically a list of values. So kind of like multiple variables which are somehow connected together, right? And then we would learn that with this comes some new powers. So the new ways how we can adjust those values in the array. So then we would learn about stuff like for each, filter, sum, or reduce. So I think those are like very cool examples of mental models which most of us can relate to and experience them firsthand in the day-to-day working with their code bases. Now, another important thing to realize is that sometimes we might have just a limited mental model, and a very cool example of that, which I really like, is when we work with TypeScript, it would be possible to create a fully functional application with the, let's say, Angular application with the TypeScript if we used just any type, right? So we are using TypeScript, we type everything as any, it's going to work, we're gonna get a working application, but it's going to be suboptimal because that application when we would like to change it, refactor it, or extend it, or we would want to onboard some more colleagues to work on it with us, we would encounter some problems because we would be basically missing that type safety and all the guarantees which the TypeScript compiler gives us out of the box, right? So that's a very good example of what a limited mental model be. So we kind of can use it, but we are missing some key parts, and because of that, we are getting suboptimal results. And therefore, we can say that the limited template context mental model often leads to applications that are harder to extend and maintain. And I would say, like in my personal experience working with like enterprises, especially here in Switzerland, many developers working on Angular application possess only a limited mental model of the template context. That means they still deliver working application which is providing value for their users, which is great, and that's actually all that matters in the end, but it's suboptimal, and because of that, usually over time it becomes much harder to maintain and extend these applications, and this is basically what we are trying to improve with this talk. So let's get started with something very basic, and it will be a first NGModules approach because this is anyway like de facto standard that have been used now for many years. So most applications use NGModules. And like the very simple example could be an application component which uses another component, my organization hello, in its template. Now, if we just generated this kind of application with the Angular schematics, we would see that we would get an application module which has an application component in the declarations and then also in the bootstrap, so it starts. So if we try to start this application with ng-serve, or we would try to build it for production with ng-build, we are going to get an error which looks very similar to those which we encountered previously, and especially that the application component tries to use an unknown element in its template, and we should verify that it's part of this module. And as we can see, it is not. So the my organization hello component is not the part of the same Angular template context, and in this specific case, this context is defined with the help of the ng module. Now, how can we fix it? So one of the options would be to add this hello component implementation into the declarations array of the application module, and then that would lead to a situation where we have one module, which now we already learned that the module defines a template context, and it will have two declarables, the application component, which then tries to use this other component in its template, and it can do it because now it is a part of the same context, so it can reference it, and this component will then render, and our application will compile. So the app component belongs to the application module's template context because it's part of its declarations. The hello component belongs to the application, sorry, so this is wrong. Oh no, it's correct actually. The hello component belongs to also to the application module template context because it's a part of the same declarations array. So the both application and hello components are part of the same template context. So the application component can use the hello component in its template. So this is great. Now, what would happen? So that was like a very, very basic example. And if we just approach the implementation of our application that way, we could make basically every local component part of the single application module, include all the components like that, and it would actually work, right? So, but this would be very suboptimal because of then more like advanced concepts like lazy loading, where the whole application would bundle in a single huge JavaScript file, which would make it slow for the end users to load from the network, but especially to parse the JavaScript and execute it in a browser. Right. So now, what about a bit more realistic and complex example with multiple ng modules? So first, let's extract the hello component to its own module. It would look something like this. So we have a hello module, and now we put the hello component to the declarations array of that hello module. And one thing about the Angular is that the component can only be part of a declarations of a single module. So that's just how it works. So we have something like this. Now, if we try to compile the application again, we would see like the situation now has changed. So our application now has two modules. That means it has two template contexts. And the application component belongs to the app module, and it still tries to use this hello component in its template, but it can because now it's not the part of the same template context. As we can see here, the hello component is in the declarables array of the hello module, so it's part of the hello template context, and those two are not referenced between each other, so it is not possible, and we are going to get exactly the same error again. Now, let's try to fix that. So first thing which comes to mind is we are going to import the hello module inside of the app module in these imports here. And we, of course, we already have removed the hello component from the declarations in the step previously. And we are going to add the hello module into the imports array of the app module, which should link those two template contexts and make this stuff available, right? But this is still not going to work because even though we are now referencing those two template contexts, we are connecting them so they can kind of share stuff. As it turns out, if something is just declared in the declaration arrays, in the declaration array, it becomes private to that template context, so it cannot be accessed from outside of it, right? So again, let's recapitulate. We have a two template context, application module and hello module. And application module does in fact have access to the other template context, to that hello module template context, because it was imported and therefore referenced. But as it turns out, it doesn't have access to the whole template context which was imported, because what was only in the declarables but not in the exports becomes private to that template context. So this introduces a new concept of the template context privacy. So how can we fix that? So as we have said, to make it not private but public, we have to add the component also to the exports array of that other hello module. Now, with that in place, the situation has changed again. And as we can see, now it's going to work. And the way it's going to work is that from that app module, app component tries to use the hello component in its template. And because the app module imports the hello module, it has access to that template context. So here we have this line which goes through that reference. And more so, the hello module template context not only defines what the hello component is, but it also exports it. So that way we can see that's basically the path we go to be able to access that component implementation to use it in the template of another component. So this is exactly what is going on behind the scenes. So the application now compiles without error, and we have solved our problem. Perfect. So let's recapitulate quickly. Application component belongs to app module, to its template context because of the declarations. Hello component belongs to hello module template context because of the declarations. Application components wants to use hello component in its template, which means it has to be part of the same template context defined by the application module, right? And the hello module is therefore added to the imports array of the application module. So the application module has now access to the template context of the hello module. And the last part is that the hello component has to be part of the exports of the hello module to make it accessible in the application module template context, which is now included in hello module. So the components which belong to a single template context are private to that context unless they are added to the exports array. So that's like a very important property. Now, a little side note about the SCAM pattern, which basically stands for the single component application, single component Angular module. It's a well-known pattern in Angular, and it behaves basically the same as the standalone component. And the standalone components are a way to reduce boilerplate when writing kind of like the SCAM pattern, or they're like equivalent. And there is like additional safety because standalone components prevent exporting of multiple declarables or other stuff, because it doesn't allow us to specify export. So let's see that in action. We are speaking about this because basically the way we define that previous hello module with a single component and the single component export is basically the essence of the scan pattern, because we have single component application module, right? Not application as like the core, but like just as like a or single component Angular module, sorry. So it's like an Angular module which declares and exports the single component and nothing else. So now let's see the comparison. If we have a scan, we have a component, we have the module which declares and exports that component. It can have some additional imports too. And then we can compare it to the standalone components where, as we can see, we have a component, but this component here would be declared as a standalone true, and it can also import some other modules, but it cannot have exports. So basically they behave exactly the same. Now, we have seen, like in the previous example, that we have the privacy, which was kind of pointless because we are basically separating two components from a single app module to two different modules. We had the app module and the hello module, and in that hello module, first we only had the declaration of the hello component, but we haven't exported, so we had to fix it, right? Because that kind of privacy is pointless if you have a module with a single component which nobody can use. But there can be also something like a useful privacy. So let's explore that too. So let's imagine a situation where we have a hello module which has a hello component, but also a hello animations component, which, for example, shows like some animation of a waving hand next to the name of the person which we try to say hello to, right? But this hello animation component should not be exported and not be used by other part of the application. And that could be a very cool example of a useful privacy. So as you can see, this hello animation component is part of the declarations, but is not part of the exports, and therefore it will not be part of that consumer template context, and it will stay private to that hello module template context. That means the hello component will be able to use that hello animations component, but nobody else will. So how does that look like with the diagram? Again, we have the same situation. We have two template contexts, one for the application module, one for the hello module. And again, application component tries to use the hello component, and this still works because we are importing the hello module. The hello module is exporting the hello component, which we can reference. But if we try to use hello animations component in our template, it will not work because this one stays private to that hello module template context. So that's a cool example of the privacy at work. Now, what about built-in Angular modules, which is also very related? In Angular, we have modules like common module or router module and others. They work exactly the same as our own custom modules, which we are writing when we are implementing our applications. They export Angular's own declarables like directives ngIf, ngFor, components like router outlet, or date pipe, JSON pipe, key value pipe, and stuff like that. So we can use them in our own component templates. So therefore, they have to be part of our own template contexts. So let's have a look at how this kind of Angular out-of-the-box module can be implemented. So if we know that the ngIf directive is basically delivered by the common module, it means that implementation of the directive has to be in the declarations of the common module of the Angular, and not only in the declarations, because then it would be private, it also has to be in exports array of that Angular common module. And if we actually looked at the sources of that common module over on the GitHub in the Angular repository, we would see that it's hidden in an array. But if we looked in what is the part of that common directives array, we would see that there is a reference to that ngIf directive implementation. So it works exactly like this in the every single Angular application which is currently running worldwide. Now, let's see a And okay, so this is how it works. Now, you might be thinking that when I generate my Angular application, and what I get out of the box is like the Angular module with the Angular it's the application module with the application component, and I can just start using the ng4 things in my template immediately, even though I am not importing the common module. So how is that possible if we said that Angular's modules are not special and work exactly the same following that template context mental model as our own custom module? So how is that possible? Well, this will lead us to the concept of the transitive template context. So what do we mean by that? So let's start with that common module example from the previous slide. And then we will introduce another one, which is called browser module, which is actually the module which will be part of the imports array of a app module in a freshly generated Angular application with the help of the Angular CLI. And if we explore its implementation on the GitHub, again in the Angular repo, we would see that this browser module is actually exporting the common module, right? So that means that then in our freshly generated application, which comes with something like this, it will have a app component declaration and import and the browser module in the imports. This will make it transitively part of the same template context, and that would be the reason why we can use stuff like ngIf, ng4, or JSON pipe in the template of the application component without the need to import the common module directly in the application module. So this is a very typical example of a transitive template context in action, which is happening like probably also in like every single NGModule based Angular application, because all of those actually need to import the browser module in their main application module to work, because it registers some other stuff besides those basic directives and pipes. Now, another typical example when we are encountering transitive template context is a shared module. So this is a approach which is often used in applications with the lazy loaded features, where those lazy loaded features will have a set of commonly used components, directives, and pipes, which can be grouped in that shared module. So how would that look like? So first we start with the shared module itself, and we are starting to build its template context by bringing some stuff in, by importing some modules. So for example, we can import a common module, which will bring stuff like ngIf and ng4 into the local template context. And then something like a material card module, because we want to use it to implement some other widgets, right? So that's like the first step. So we are building the template context of that shared module. And then we are going to implement some local shared widgets. So for example, animated start component and my organization rating component. And those are local implementation to that shared module template context. But because we already have these imports here, that means when we are trying to implement the templates of those components, they can already use stuff like ngIf, because the common module is already part of this template context. Then the rating can use the animated star because it's a part of the same template context, but more so they can also use material card, so that we can wrap that rating in a card again, because the material card was imported and it exports that card component. So it's again part of the same local template context. But for example, we would not be able to use material toolbar because it was not imported here. So, and once we have it prepared like this, it would mean that everything is private, so it would not be really useful. So we have to add exports, and here we are going to add multiple things. So first of all, common module, we will re-export it, because basically every single Angular feature, lazy feature component most likely needs the set of those basic directives to implement that template. Then we'll also export the card, because it's also something which is useful almost in every feature which you can imagine, so it kind of makes sense. We can also export the toolbar, because it's in this kind of application we use it like for many features. But this comes to that first thing where we notice the distinction. When we export it, we will be able to use it in the consumer template context, but we cannot use it in the local one. So that's a very important distinction. And then we are also exporting this locally defined rating component so that the features can use it, but we are not exporting that partial component for the animated star. This one stays private. So this one was a pretty packed example, but it illustrates all the features of the template context, including the local one, bringing stuff in, privacy, and providing stuff for the consumers. So the template context can be transitive. Target template context can receive declarables from multiple NG modules or their template contexts because of the imports, right? And the first level of that is when we have like modules which are directly in our imports. So if the target module is the application module, if I import the hello module or shared module, then I'm getting basically directly stuff from them. But as we have seen, we can add multiple levels to the whole story with the transitive template context, where we can receive the stuff from the second all the way to the end, so we can have as many levels as necessary as the modules keep re-exporting those other modules which have been imported. In practice, we usually do not go too deep, 2-3 levels max, but that's how this works. Now, that kind of describes how the template context works for the NG modules, but what about the Angular standalone components, right? Because if we remember, the whole talk started with the premise that the standalone components and the NG modules share this underlying base reality, which is the template context, and therefore we are not going to experience breaking of our applications anytime soon. So let's explore that. So again, we have exactly the same example, just the only difference being that this is now a standalone component. So we have an application component which tries to use the My Organization Hello component in its template. Because this is a standalone component, we are not using application module, but the application will be bootstrapped directly with the help of the standalone component itself. Now, again, if we try to compile or build this kind of application, we would get the same or very similar error, which would say, okay, my organization hello is unknown. And if it's an Angular component, then please make sure that it's included in component imports. So not in the same module, but in the components imports, because this is now a standalone component. So this means that my organization hello component is again not a part of the same template context of that Angular standalone component. So we cannot use it, right? And it would work exactly the same for the directive or the pipe. That's the whole point why we call them declarables. So let's fix it. Let's just say we would implement our hello component also as a Angular standalone component. So that would mean we would have to add it to the imports array of our destination or target standalone component, in this case application component, and this should make it part of the same template context. So let's have a look. This is also basically represents like the main difference between like the NG modules and the standalone components. So as we can see, we have actually already from start 2 template contexts. So that means application component, because it's a standalone component, has its own template context, and it tries to use the hello component in its template. And it also has a hello standalone component in its imports. So it's kind of like using the imports which would previously be used for the modules, but now is used for the standalone components. That means there is this reference to that other template context, because it's another standalone component, and every standalone component defines its own template context. So we again go to that reference, but then all the way to that component itself. So that means we have it only in declarables, and we don't have any exports, but basically the standalone components behave as if that declared component was automatically the only item in the exports array of that template context, and this is why it works. So we don't have it here, but we would have it here. It's kind of like hidden behind the scenes, right? We don't have to write it. So that means the NG modules and standalone components are two ways of achieving exactly the same, which is defining and managing the template context for the local template. And the template context mental model is a great tool to understand the common underlying reality of Angular, because again, there are two ways of achieving the same, right? So once we start, we don't have to think about like, okay, we have NG modules and we have standalone components. We can forget about the distinction and we can only think about the template context. And once we have this mental model, we would not care which one we are using, and we can mix and match them with ease while preserving the full understanding of how those things work, and why they work like that. So the template context is the most important thing you need to understand about Angular, because it describes how Angular works at its utmost core, and it isn't going to change in the foreseeable future, at least I hope. But as you can see, like even that new thing, which is the standalone components, basically embrace it fully and follows exactly the same rules. It just represents some kind of like a syntactic sugar to write less code to define and manage those underlying template contexts. So let's have a look at the interop between the NG modules and standalone components, because we said that we can mix and match them with ease. So let's just say we have standalone component, again, application component, which imports and uses in its template another standalone component, my organization hello, but the example has a new thing, ngIf, right? And again, if we try to compile this would fail, because the ngIf, which we now know is a part of the common module, and it's declared there and exported by it, it's not part of this current template context, right? So we are going to get this kind of error, but there will be a twist, because it will set that the neither ngIf directive itself nor the common module were imported. So this gives us basically a hint that two things should be possible. So let's have a look. First option would be to import the whole common module in the current template context, which would then make, because it re-exports the ngIf directive, it would make the application compile successfully. Or we can import the directive ngIf directly, because it was now provided by Angular also as a standalone component, or let's say directive in that case, right? So it's using the standalone true flag on that directive. So this means that because of this underlying reality of template context, those things are like interchangeable and can be mixed and matched with ease. And of course, then there are like some nuanced trade-offs, because when we import the common module, we are getting more directives and pipes that our application might need. So in that case, there is a trade-off between having better developer experience in the case of common module, where we just need to manage list like of less imports because we import only one thing and we get everything, or if we wanted to have the smallest possible bundle size of our application to achieve the smallest possible application, we would have to manage the list of all the directives which are used per template context, which can be a lot of effort if we have many components, right? So one key difference is that standalone components don't support multi-level transitive approach to template context, because it is not possible to define exports array. So as you can see here, like it is not possible. So as we said that whenever we have a standalone component, it's like as if it's a declaration and the export hidden behind the scenes, and it's like predefined, but we actually cannot adjust it. So that means that we cannot have this nice transitive approach, but because we said that the standalone components and ng modules can be mixed and matched with ease, that means we could group them with the ng module and re-export them, or another approach would be to group them just in like some array and then spread it into all the consumers directly. So then it doesn't need to be transitive, but it's still grouped for the better developer experience. So So that also means that every standalone component must fully define its own template context. So that means it has to specify all the other modules and other standalone components which it wants to use in its template. So that's kind of like the main difference between the NG modules, where we can have multiple components in the same context and also import even more components, pipeline directives through imports. And then all that stuff is available in a single context, and we can just use the selectors and attributes in our templates without needing to manage it. With the standalone components, we have to manage the template context for each individual standalone component individually for its own template. And again, this makes it easier to have the smallest application possible, but it also means that it will be more effort on the developer side. So this is a trade-off which everybody has to evaluate based on their specific needs and their specific application and their specific use case. So I hope I could show you that Angular was, is, and stays a stable piece of technology, because the new standalone component approach basically works behind the scenes exactly the same as old engine module approach. That means that there is this underlying reality, which is the template context, which is a very useful mental model when working with Angular applications. Cool. So that was a wild ride. If you are interested more in about this topic, please check out that blog, because there is article which is exactly about that, even with much more examples and more in depth, which we do not have time to explore in this talk. So do not hesitate and check it out. And do not also forget to subscribe to get updated whenever the new free blog posts were released by me and Kevin, and hopefully in the future also some other cool folks. Besides that, if you are working with Angular in large enterprise environments, then check out our offer of the Angular for Enterprises consulting and development services, project architecture setup reviews, NX monorepos, performance and bundle size optimization, many things, workshops and trainings for Angular, NGRX, and RxJS. Do not hesitate and check the offer at the angularexperts.io. And last but not least, if you are working in enterprise environment and you are interested in how to set up your Angular project to be successful and long-term maintainable, then you might be interested in the Angular Enterprise Architecture ebook, which guides you through the whole process, how to scaffold the whole application architecture, separate business features into isolated parts, share code between features in maintainable way, and how to handle it in the future with the standalone components. People seem to like it. And if you are a viewer of the TinyConf, you can apply the IX TinyConf 50 coupon to get 50% off that book. Great. So thank you for your attention, and I hope you enjoyed the content and learned about the underlying reality of Angular template context.